Hi, I'm Candace.
And I'm Belle,
and welcome back
to our Closing the Early Literacy Gap podcast.
So, are you an early learning teacher, preschool or early elementary, who wonders why you can't seem to help all the kids in your class?
Or maybe you're a parent who's searching for answers to why your child isn't learning how to read.
Or maybe you're an administrator or a trainer of teachers still trying to find the answers for them to help them out.
If you're one of these, then you're in the right place. This is episode 2.
Yes.
We'll be talking about the issue of illiteracy.
Yeah.
So we're so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us today. As I said, we're going to be exploring the issue of illiteracy and what are the problems. Now, at first I thought, well, we don't really want to start with the problems. But if you don't know what the problem is, you can't fix it.
Right.
So if you have a problem with your car, you can't fix it if you don't know where the problem is and what the problem is.
Or if you're sick.
Right.
You can't get better.
You got to find out what the problem is, right? Yep. So in the next couple of episodes, we are going to explore what we believe that problem is from what we've seen and what we've learned and what we've researched. So
in our last episode, we talked about
that's right.
How many teachers don't know how to help their struggling students or their struggling readers. And this is at the heart of the problem. And this, I think, is where Belle and I feel the most passionate because we are teachers.
We've experienced this.
We experience this still, like on a daily basis.
Definitely.
And you know, we're just trying to make a difference.
Right. So really a lot of this podcast is also our exploring and our own learning of what the science says and what we're trying and how to make it practical in the classroom for people. And we just want to share that with you guys as we do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
A recent survey by the National Council on Teacher Quality have revealed that scientifically grounded concepts about learning to read and information about language structure are not taught in the majority of teacher preparation instructions. I got that from the Letrs manual. And that's pretty concerning that in the teacher preparation classes that we're going through as teachers, we're not being taught the scientific principles. And I think there is getting to be some places that are doing it more, but still as a general rule, we're not
trying to incorporate it more, but there isn't anything right now that is a set process, I don't think.
So our own experience, for example, how we learned the science of reading was not in college.
No, it wasn't through education. It wasn't. Right.
In fact, both of us learned from the same place because we found out later that we both taught at the same school for our first experience at different times because remember, I am older than her.
But it was amazing. I remember going, and it was a private school. And I remember going into this school, and this is the private school I started actually, and I'm so grateful that they did this. But they started me in their preschool program first, and I was a little bummed out about it. But they said, in order to be able to teach in kindergarten, you need to understand how we teach them how to read. And you have to start at the foundation because you're going to get kids who are missing that foundation, and you'll know how to do that.
You know, so you probably got more than me at that school because I taught second grade at that school.
Okay.
But I still learned phonics rules from that program that I was like, I didn't know this.
Same.
I'm like, how can I be a teacher of kids learning how to read without knowing this stuff?
Right.
Knowing the foundation principles of reading.
Right. I mean, just for example, you know, I didn't even know there was this thing as irregular vowels or vowel teams or you know, how different letters could combine to make different sounds. And that all has to do with decoding and, you know, word mapping and word chunking that has to build into later reading and all of these words.
And I remember like learning rules like when to use C and K.
Yes.
And being like, I never knew this. Right? This is really interesting stuff.
Yes, I know, right? Or
there's actually a rhyme and a reason to this. It's not just random, you know, like I always just thought it was random, but it's not.
There's actual rules that on why our words say and are spoken the way they are.
Yeah. And for me, that was 1996. So it was a long time ago and we knew these things clear back then.
2013.
Yeah, see, we're a little bit different. So we were at that school at different times, but we learned from this private school. We learned some of the rules of phonics that we should have learned in our teacher education, honestly.
Yep, absolutely.
And then like one example of my own teacher education where that I had is then later at another school that I was teaching at. We had a professor from the very university that I went to,
Okay.
come and teach us some of these principles
Mhm.
of teaching kids to read. And he said he'd been teaching up at that university for 25 years. And I thought, I never learned this stuff. How did I graduate as an elementary education teacher and not learn this stuff? So I actually went and talked to him afterwards. And I said, I graduated from your university and I never had you as a teacher and I never learned this stuff. And he said, you're an elementary education major, aren't you? You were an elementary education major, weren't you? And I
Right.
said, yes. And he said, they won't let me touch elementary education. They will only let me teach the special ed majors. So, but, and you might say, some people might say, oh, well, that makes sense because special ed teachers need to know how to teach the kids that are struggling readers. But the truth is, these are basic
Everybody
reading
needs to know how to
principles.
teach the struggling
They're
readers.
basic reading principles. And even if all kids didn't need to learn this stuff,
Yeah.
teachers need to know how to recognize what their kids need and how to
Yes.
teach them and know when there's a problem instead of just going, hopefully they'll catch on eventually.
Right.
They need to know this stuff. Teachers need to know this stuff, guys.
Yep, absolutely. I 100% agree with you.
And this is not just us. Yes, this sounds very anecdotal because we're talking about ourselves.
Yes.
But from what we've been gathering through our things that we've been listening to, podcasts, books, research that we've been doing, this is a very common problem. So common that there's a Facebook page that's huge.
Yeah.
It's got a huge following called The Science of Reading What I Should Have Learned in College.
Yes.
It's a big deal.
So if you have, go look it up. Go explore some
Yes,
things that
find
are on
that.
there for sure.
It's actually a great page. A lot of people are asking questions on it,
Yeah.
giving their answers. And I mean, it's not scientifically researched, but people are sending you to science or telling you what they believe is science. And there's some disagreements on it, things like that. But it's a good place to start.
Yep, I agree. The second problem, besides teachers not knowing how to teach, is parents don't know how to help their kids, or sometimes they don't even know that their kid needs help.
Right? They think, oh, the schools will teach them.
Yep.
I'll just send my kid to school. And then even when their kid is struggling and they ask the teachers, I feel like they're struggling with reading. The teacher will say, oh, they're doing fine. They'll catch on. I've heard that story
so many times.
Because
and sometimes, like, I think parents need to understand too, depending on the school itself and the director of that school, sometimes you're told to sugarcoat. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just plain and simple.
Well,
like, no,
actually,
they're doing fine.
I have a friend. I just remembered this. I have a friend who told me that she told the parent that she didn't learn how to teach kids how to read in college. Mm-hmm. And the parent went to the principal, and the principal pulled that teacher aside and said, you cannot tell parents that. You cannot tell parents that you didn't learn how to teach reading in college. She's like, but I didn't. I know. So, yeah, I mean, of course, we don't want, but parents have a right to know that teachers haven't really learned this stuff. And teachers are hard workers. Like, it's a really hard job, and they're doing the best they can. And some do know more than others, and especially now, more and more teachers are getting trained in letters, are getting trained in the science of reading. So it's getting better. So don't just automatically assume every teacher doesn't know, but a lot of teachers, they don't know, and this is a lot of people's experience, and it's a big part of the problem.
Right.
In fact, I have this book that I bought called 1 in 5 by Micki Boas. And the subtitle is How We're Fighting for Our Dyslexic Kids in a System That's Failing Them. And it's called 1 in 5 because supposedly 1 in 5 children have dyslexia. That's 20%. That's pretty high.
That is.
And this book is all about her struggle to find help for her dyslexic child. And then she's got a whole chapter in here where she's gathered stories of many parents who have had similar experiences. It's a huge problem. And a lot of parents, who have resources and time, like this parent had the time and the resources to do her own research, to find and to fight for her child. There are so many who don't have the time, the resources, the know-how. They just send their kids to school and hope that it happens. And when it doesn't, they don't know what to do.
Right.
It's too late.
Right. And I mean, unfortunately, like, that's the thing is a lot of parents go, well, that's not my job. Right. I am not a teacher.
I don't know how to teach kids.
I never learned how to teach kids how to read. It's not my job. That's the school's job. That's why I'm sending my child here. And I think a lot of it, parents just don't know. Yeah. They just are not aware.
Well, and then also I think teachers tend to pass the buck. I hate to say that because I don't want to be negative. I don't want to be negative about any teachers or anybody in this process because it's all, everybody's trying to do the best they can, but we need to find out where the core of the problem is.
Right.
And I do think teachers will say, they pass the buck by saying, oh, they'll catch on.
Yep.
They'll catch on. You don't really need to worry until third grade. Right. And then, so we mentioned this before in the last episode and we read this quote from Letrs that says, unless students learn to read by the end of first grade, they're highly likely to remain poor readers and suffer academic difficulties across all subjects because reading is so foundational.
It is.
Right. And we've said that we want to focus on early schools here, which we're going to really focus on literacy because that affects all the subjects.
Yes.
Every subject. And so if they can't read as they get older and they're more expected to do stuff, it just becomes problem. And some people think, well, my child didn't start studying until third or fourth grade. Well, that's because they didn't learn how to read earlier.
Right.
And it's affecting the other subjects.
Right. And it's not that they didn't start struggling until third grade. It's that all of a sudden the bar was lifted.
Yes.
Because there's such a low bar.
Well, and not only that, but as a first grade teacher, we just plan on reading everything to kids. We plan on helping kids with the reading and the writing portions
we read
because
the
they don't know how. A lot of kids can read it. We don't just assume we read it. But in second grade, maybe they do that a little bit more. But by third and fourth grade,
it's independent.
The kids are expected to be independent on all that stuff. So those are two big problems. Teachers don't know how to teach, and parents don't know how to get help or how to even know that their child has a problem.
Yes.
So as a result, a lot of kids can't read. And we just want to refer back to what we mentioned in the last episode, which according to the nation's report card using NAEP scores, in 2022, only 33% of the nation's fourth graders were proficient in reading. Now, some people might think that is because of the pandemic.
Right.
Because 2022 was after the pandemic.
Right.
But this research it's the graph I have somewhere here, shows all the way back to 1992. Yeah. In 1992, it was only, what do we figure? 28% of the kids were proficient. And it did seem to go up a little to where in 2019, it was 35%. We went from 28% to 35% that were not proficient. These are the kids that are proficient. Sorry, I'm saying that wrong. The kids that are proficient in reading. But then back in 2022, I back down to 33%. So it did drop a little bit with the pandemic. Right. And it does look like it's been going up a little bit since 1992. But part of that is the science is really starting to pick up a little bit.
Right.
But even
from 1992 to 2019 to go up just what is that?
5%.
5%. Is not
very much.
Not enough.
It's not enough. And we can say, oh, those kids, that means 67 in 2022, 67% of our kids were not proficient in reading. And then I also pointed out that the truthaboutreading.com said that 66% of students who cannot read proficiently by the end of fourth grade will end up in jail. Now, I didn't research that statistic. Right. I don't know where they're getting that statistic. But if I'm doing my math correctly, that would mean 44% of our 2022 fourth graders will end up in jail. That's almost half.
And that's sad to think about.
It's super sad.
We can make a difference. We can help fix this. Like the tools are there. Kind of.
Yes. We're just still figuring out how to use it. And that's why we want to do this podcast, because we just feel like the word needs to get out. There's just too many teachers, too many parents who still don't know how to help these kids. And there's too many kids that are struggling with it.
Right.
So another part of the problem is the difficulty of science.
Right.
Knowing what works and what doesn't work. This is a big problem. So we're going to talk about that for just a few more minutes. The last 5 minutes or so, we're going to talk about the difficulty of science. So there are a few things that make science difficult. First one is that it's changing a lot. We're still learning and growing. So we might read something in science and go, oh, that means this. And then later we find out it's actually a little bit different than that or something like that, right? That's normal science. And we can't let that deter us from using science though, right?
Right.
We have to do what we know is best at the time. Okay. And then also there's a lot of biases and unwillingness to actually look at the science that contradicts your beliefs. And this is huge in education.
Yes.
I had experience years ago where when I was an administrator, I was invited to be part of a state committee on writing. So the details about what we were discussing and everything we can talk about in a later episode.
Okay.
But the reason the state leader who invited everybody on this committee to come, they invited administrators and college professors and just people around the state who had a stake in state literacy.
Okay.
And we met like over a year's time, and we like did studies, and we met like once every month or two, and we discussed what we learned from our studies and all this kind of stuff. But I remember in one of the first episodes, one of the first things, the leader told me she invited me because she knew we were doing something different at our school.
Right.
And what we were doing different, I thought, was based on science, based on, what I had been told and what I had looked into. But the other educators in the room were completely opposed to it. And but we said, okay, well, let's find some science. So that was our goal for the next one, to find science. And nobody could find any science. I don't know how hard the others looked at it, but I had a hard time finding science. But I was busy I wasn't teaching. I was an administrator. I was a mom and an administrator, and it was really hard to find it. But really, we didn't find any research on it. And so I actually decided to do my own little experiment with the kids in our school.
Right.
And I had some really amazing results from that. And I took it back to the committee the next time. And the leader was so impressed. She told me I should hook up with one of the university professors and get with a graduate student and do a real research on that. And none of them are interested in doing that with me.
Why do you think that is?
I think that they didn't want to believe that what I was doing, which was so different from what they were doing, could be successful. And they based it on it. There was a book that they had that we actually all got a copy of this book because we were doing all this research.
Right.
And the person in this book was somebody that they really admired and respected, and he recommended against what we were doing.
Okay.
But he didn't have any science to base it on. And that's why we were like, okay, we're going to go try to find science. So it's a perfect example of where educators are like, no, we don't want to look into that, because it goes against what we believe.
Yes. And so then there's the misunderstanding or the misinterpretation or the exaggeration of data that I think can skew a lot of people's. I mean, there are people, even in education, who are really good at marketing and using data to drive what they personally believe, their own personal bias.
And they'll take the data, just like, I mean, honestly, we're a little guilty of doing this because we just did this with this data from NAEP scores, where we said 33% of kids are not proficient at reading. And then we took that other data that said 66% of kids that are proficient at reading by the end of fourth grade will end up in jail.
Yes.
And I don't know whether those came from the same sources.
Right. Or different.
Or if they're even meaning, when they say the 66% of kids not proficient, are they meaning not proficient at it, which is this using what standards? Like, how do they determine proficiency?
Yes.
They could be using a completely different standard of how proficiency is measured.
Right.
Because even on these NAEP scores, you can see on these NAEP scores, if you look it up you can look it up on the nationsreportcard.com if anybody's interested in looking up more data on this. But it said for 2022, 33% were proficient, 29% were at basic. And on this report, it says basic indicates partial mastery of fundamental skills. So that means they have some fundamental skills.
Right.
They just may not be
proficient,
reaching the benchmarks that, people have determined, somebody has determined means proficient. So maybe that 66%, didn't include the 29% that have some basic. Maybe, but still 37% with the 29% plus the 33%, 29% of basic plus the 33% proficient. That still leaves 37% below basic. And clearly, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So we do want to look at the science, but we just do have to be really careful that we're not exaggerating or misinterpreting and call ourselves out on it.
Right.
Like
absolutely. And if you guys, feel like you found data or something, please, let us know, because we really want to try and use science with integrity, like Belle said in our last episode.
Yes.
We really want to do that because we think the misinterpretation of data is also something that really skews what is being done in schools, because they're misinterpreting what's trying to be said.
Right. And in my experience, educators are not scientists.
No.
Educators go on their gut. In fact, they're taught it in the Letrs manual. It said they're taught to use intuition, self-reflection, personal experience, and anecdotal evidence. Now, anecdotal evidence is just taking a story And that's really, really big in education, right?
Right.
I use that with my own daughter. I told the story in our last episode about my daughter and what I did to help her. That's an anecdotal story.
Yep.
And just because it worked with that person doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work with others. So we have to look at the actual scientific studies overall to see what works, what helps kids with dyslexia versus other kids. It's really important that we look into that. And so science with integrity is going to be
and
really
that's just
important.
That's just teachers' feedback loop.
Right.
It's just how they interpret the data, their information that's coming in via their experience in the day-to-day, everyday classroom with those specific kids. They're learning which kids can do certain things, which ones can't, and just, you know, using that to try and get the best results from each kiddo.
Right, which brings up another issue that we discussed earlier, which is the practical application of science.
Yes.
Like taking what you learn in science and applying it to the classroom is so difficult because not only are you trying to teach these kids how to read, you're trying to manage them. Right. And when you have 30 little kids in a class, like just trying to manage them sometimes is all you can do.
Especially if they're all at different levels.
Exactly. It's a challenge. Teaching is a hard job. And that's why we're doing this. We're trying to explore how to do better and trying to share what we learn.
And if the resources aren't already there, you have to create them yourself.
Right.
And a lot of teachers are very creative and really good at doing this. And this is where I think my niche is taking what I've learned and creating applications for it for kids.
She's really, really great at that. Just taking what she knows. I like to get into the science and then like I try to apply it and I'm like, this isn't working. But she has a knack with figuring out what works. So that's why we're joining forces so that we can help each other and hopefully we can help you. So hopefully in this podcast, we'll be able to offer practical applications of real science. We'll be able to get into the real science with integrity. So next episode, we're going to talk about what schools are doing wrong. So again, we're going to consider the problem, but we're going to go a little bit more fine-tuned into exactly what schools are doing wrong to cause some of the problems. So we hope you'll join us then, and we hope that you will email us.
Yes, once again, please email us with questions or ideas for discussion topics, or if you guys have come up with your own data, please share. If you just sources and all of this kind of stuff, we would love to hear it all. Once again, our email address is Candice, KANDICE, ANDBEL @gmail.com. So Candice and Bell @gmail.com.
Thanks again for joining us today.
And we'll see you next time.
Yep.